So, what happens when a sacred promise, like a really big one, smacks right into a brutal reality? Does it hold up, or does it just shatter? Well, today we're going to dive into this incredible ancient story about war, desperation, and faith that all comes down to that one question. Okay, so our first section here is called a covenant on the ground. And this phrase, it comes straight from the source material, and you've got to love it. It's this brilliant piece of wordplay that really sets the stage for everything we're about to talk about. See, a covenant on the ground can mean two completely opposite things. On the one hand, you could think of it as a promise that's actually working, right? It's on the ground, it's in operation, it's real. But it could also mean a promise that's failed, that's been broken and has literally fallen to the ground. And that tension, that is it working or is it broken, that's the central question the Book of Kings keeps coming back to. All right, so what exactly is a covenant? Well, think of it as a super serious, sacred agreement, a binding promise. And in this context, we're talking about the foundational promise between God and the nation of Israel. The whole Book of Kings, really, is this long, hard look at how well that agreement was actually held up, or not, by the people and especially by their leaders. Okay, so how does this all play out in real life? Well, let's zoom in on one specific story that puts this whole idea of the covenant to the ultimate test. We're talking about a military alliance, a super risky gamble, and a crisis that comes this close to wiping out 3 entire armies. So here's the historical backdrop. For, get this, over 150 years, the neighboring kingdom of Moab has basically been paying tribute to Israel. But then the really powerful and, let's be honest, infamous King Ahab dies, and Moab, they smell blood in the water. They see an opportunity, and they revolt. This is a huge challenge to the new king, Ahab's son Jehoram. He knows he has to shut this rebellion down, and fast. But Jehoram is smart enough to know he can't do this by himself, so he puts together an alliance. He calls on King Jehoshaphat from the southern kingdom of Judah, and he brings in the vassal king of Edom, too. So now you've got 3 kings, 1 massive army, and 1 single goal: get Moab back in line. And their plan. This is where it gets really interesting. They don't take the obvious route, a straight shot attacking from the north. No, they go for this incredibly risky, totally unconventional plan. They decide to march all the way south through the bone-dry wilderness of Edom to attack Moab from its soft underbelly, its weaker southern border. It's a brilliant but super high-stakes surprise attack. So for 7 days straight, they march. Just imagine it, through this barren, unforgiving desert, pushing deeper and deeper into hostile territory. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? Well, everything. The army runs completely out of water. They're in the middle of a desert, miles from anywhere, and their brilliant military strategy has just turned into a death trap. And right here, this is the moment the whole story turns. The crisis strips everything away. This isn't about strategy anymore. It's about 2 kings and 2 totally different mindsets when facing utter disaster. Just look at the contrast here. It's black and white. King Jehoram of Israel, he completely falls apart. He basically cries out, "Did God bring us all the way out here just to kill us?" He's convinced it's a trap set by God. But then you have King Jehoshaphat of Judah. His reaction? Totally different. He asks, "Hey, isn't there a prophet of the Lord around here we can talk to?" One guy sees a trap, the other one starts looking for a plan. So, why the huge difference in how they react? The source material gives us this really interesting concept to explain Jehoram's meltdown. It's called double-mindedness. It's this idea of trying to have it both ways. One foot loyal to God, but the other foot planted firmly in worldly things. And when you're living like that, when disaster strikes, it's easy to think God is personally out to get you. And here's the big takeaway from that. A crisis doesn't create your character, it reveals it. The source makes this great distinction between a test, which is designed to make you stronger, and a temptation, which is designed to make you fail. For Jehoram, this whole situation is a temptation, a trap. But for Jehoshaphat, it's a test. So, right when it looks like all hope is lost, this prophet, who, by the way, was apparently with the army the whole time without anyone noticing, steps into the picture. And the solution he offers is, well, it's pretty strange, to say the least. The prophet's name is Elisha, and he gives them this just incredible message. He says, "You won't see any wind, you won't see any rain, But this whole valley is going to fill up with water. Oh, and by the way, God's also going to give you a complete victory over Moab. I mean, talk about a promise, an impossible rescue, and a guaranteed win. And this is such a great insight into how the source looks at miracles. The argument is, don't get too hung up on the how. Was it a freak flash flood? Maybe, but that's not the point. The real miracle is the when. The fact that water appeared, and a lot of it, at the exact time, in the exact place, just like the prophet said it would. That's the part that's impossible to explain away. But Elisha's message isn't all good news. It comes with a really dark and troubling part. And this is where the story starts to get complicated. So Elisha goes on and he describes what their victory is going to look like. He says they're going to chop down every good tree, block up all the springs, and ruin every good field with stones. We'd call that a scorched earth policy today. Total destruction. And that just hangs in the air, right? It raises this huge, unsettling question. Is God actually commanding them to do this? Is this a divine order to go and destroy the land? Now, the source makes a really important distinction here. It argues that this isn't a command, it's a prediction. It's foreknowledge. Elisha isn't telling them, go do this. He's telling them, this is what you are going to do once you have this overwhelming victory. He's just seeing their future actions. And this leads to such a powerful principle from the source. It's this. Every open door is not the door you should go through. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. Having the power to do something isn't the same thing as having God's permission to do it. Okay, so the army gets its water, just like Elisha said. They attack, and they absolutely crush the Moabites, pushing them all the way back to their main fortified city. But this is where the story takes another bizarre turn. It doesn't end in a clear victory. It ends with a really strange and confusing retreat. In a final, horrifying act of desperation, the king of Moab sacrifices his own son, his heir, on the city wall for everyone to see. And the text just says that after this, great fury came upon Israel, and the three kings and their armies just left. They withdrew. They packed up and went home. And nobody really knows why. Scholars have all these theories. Were the Israelite soldiers so horrified they couldn't fight anymore? Did they trigger God's anger for pushing things to this awful point? We don't know for sure. But the key thing is they weren't beaten. They chose to leave. And so this incredible story leaves us right back where we started, thinking about that covenant. Is it in operation, or has it fallen to the ground? It all comes back to that one question that the two kings had to face out there in the desert. When a disaster hits your life, when your brilliant plan completely falls apart and you feel like you've got no options left, what do you see? Do you see a trap that's meant to destroy you, or do you see a test that's meant to show you who you really are?